Right, we're back. We're going to continue this QoS, QoE discussion. And Greg, we were talking about SD-WAN and how you measure applications and you measure flows and measure the real-time performance of circuits, and mashing up all that data, we come up with a very different forwarding paradigm that guarantees a quality of experience for the user. So let's get into some of the nitty-gritty here and how we're actually going to do this and how this is done. And I know I'm still looking at your very lengthy set of notes here, so go for it, brain guy.
To get quality of experience, you need to get more bandwidth. And sometimes you're not actually buying the bandwidth to go faster, or quite often you're just doing it to reduce latency, right? Remember, if you're round robining your outbound flows or your inbound flows across more circuits, it'll just get better. So the unique thing about the internet is the idea of a brownout. That is, on my DSL connection might have 20 meg up, but that doesn't mean that there's guaranteed 20 meg up. I might only get 10 because I'm sharing it with everybody who's attached to my DSLAM. So don't just get more bandwidth, get twice the bandwidth, get 4 times the bandwidth, and not to get more speed, but to get better latency in a brownout situation. That's where there's some resource exhaustion in the public WAN. I sometimes call the internet public WAN.
You know, we haven't talked about direct internet access circuits either, but that is somewhat implied in this conversation, where you're not backhauling everything from your branches into your headquarter locations to do security. You've actually set up direct internet access circuits at all of your branch locations to have their own bandwidth and reduced latency there, and then dealt with the security in some way. There's various ways you can service chain. Go ahead.
I generally don't recommend DIA. This is a very general statement. Generally, what we find is that direct internet access is the least best solution. We have people who tell us they connected SD-WAN to an MPLS DIA and it worked worse than 4G or a DSL connection or a cable connection.
I think we're talking across purposes. All I mean is your branches have their own internet access. That's all I'm getting.
That's right. Yeah. Well, for some people, direct internet access on their MPLS is like a high quality internet.
Yes, I know. And I've actually had to clarify that with vendors as well to make sure we were talking about the same thing. Because I think what DIA has come to mean in SD-WAN literature is your branches have their own.
Branch breakout. Yeah. Well, I'm not talking about that today, but that's a key. So getting more bandwidth is key to a modern SD-WAN, because the further you can spread your load, the more circuits you can spread your load across, the better it will work. Sometimes you just want to get more connections just to have more connections and get more availability. When you're looking at your SD-WAN solution, have a look at how it adapts to network conditions. If there's congestions in the core of the backbone, whether it's an internet or an MPLS, can you get sub-second failover? Can you get per packet failover, not flow failover? We talked about that up in the second episode here. What are the recovery mechanisms in the endpoint? So what we find sometimes about the quality of experience is that the endpoints themselves have mechanisms to recover data. So even if data gets dropped in flight, some of the SD-WAN vendors can do some mathematical encoding to recover the lost data.
Well, there's that. There's parity options on some of them that we've heard about. There's also the sending the same packet across 2 different links at a time to guarantee delivery. It's only going to use one, but they'll send 2 copies of the packet for what is deemed to be very important traffic. That's a voice use case oftentimes.
Yes, it is, or video, or if you've got some mission critical hooba-jigger. But again, you can only use 20 to 30% of the bandwidth to do that, because, if you start to spray, too much duplication, you end up with problems. Keep in mind about asymmetric packet handling, as we talked about before, that in a lot of modern circuits, you could have a brownout in one direction, but not in another, and you need to be adaptively changing the configuration of the box. Acceleration can be very useful, especially on long LFN, long fat networks.
Yeah, you're talking about WAN optimization techniques, things like TCP optimizations and compression can come in there and so on.
And also there's some types of SD-WANs that do specific flow controls in the TCP algorithm that work better over long, highly latent, but high bandwidth networks like satellites, right? Mm-hmm. What we think, however, is that generally what we've discovered is that most of the SD-WAN vendors are telling us that WAN acceleration is not so useful. Now, there are use cases where WAN acceleration is still useful, but WAN acceleration was always a specialist tool, and it's getting even more specialist than it was before.
Overcoming applications that were designed for a LAN environment that became WAN applications and just sucked because they were never designed to go over those highly latent networks. Most applications don't have that problem anymore. There's been subsequent versions that have overcome a lot of those things. And so going back to your point, a lot of the WAN up stuff, does it even matter anymore? You can't compress uncompressible or already compressed streams. Encryption, complicates things as well with a lot of these WAN switches. Are they any good? Yes, there's use cases, but they are diminishing There's just
Yes.
it's not like what it.
Well,
Not
we know
everybody
that.
needs a WAN out box in the corner anymore like they used to have.
Yeah, that's very true. And we know that because when we talk SD-WAN with Silver Peak and Riverbed, the two big WAN acceleration vendors today, neither of them really talk about WAN acceleration. So we'll take
No,
that as
in fact, you could even argue that those companies that are so well known for exactly that have pivoted, and they're SD-WAN companies now. And
yes.
Silver Peak, by default, doesn't even include WAN up in the solution.
No.
If you need it, they'll sell it to you. It's called
It's a license, yeah.
Unity Boost, I believe, and it's a license upgrade if you actually
Yeah.
still need it for your use case.
But, just to compare that, Talari says that you wouldn't need it in their solution because of their per packet load balancing, asymmetric load generation, deep packet inspection, and their ability to recover from data corruption in flight. So if you do lose data in flight, it can recover from some of that. Silver Peak can as well. So there's a big difference between the vendors, which is what we wanted to do. Diff-serve cost does still have a factor here. If you have a passionate belief that a tag in a packet actually is a source of truth,
Yeah.
you can actually use that tag as part of in the SD-WAN configuration. So if you want to believe that an EF flag is something special,
Well, you can, most of the SD-WAN solutions will honor the tag, in other words. So if you've gone to the trouble to build out a marking scheme on your network, so you know that EF is my voice traffic, and I've got AF 41, 31, and 21, and those all mean things, and you want to use those tags to inform the policy you're creating with your SD-WAN. Hey, if it's marked this way, I want you to treat it like this. You can do this. You can still get some benefit from that, but it's almost like, why when you can do deep packet inspection, identify the application that way? It's kind of like, do I have to care about the marks anymore? What is the
people I've spoken to who do that are people who've spent so much effort doing QoS, they just can't let it go.
It feels familiar. Hug the packet, hug the mark.
I'm not hugging,
You never hugged the mark. You never did.
I've never been a big fan of QoS tagging because I was always found it just not predictable and the principle of least astonishment. It always acts in a way I'm not expecting it to act, and that's why I'm broadly opposed to QoS. It's also very difficult to monitor diff-serve.
You need to get into actually monitoring QoS classes individually, and those SNMP OIDs exist, but you got to know what you're looking for and then monitor them in such a way that you understand what traffic is getting dropped out of each class. I have never actually seen that deployed in the wild. It can be done, and there are tools that can help you with that, but people actually figuring that out by hand and monitoring them and understanding, I'm seeing a drop happen in this particular QoS class. What should I do now? And then being able to act on it. That's an increasing.
I'm seeing a 10% packet loss in the AF class on this device. And the challenge here again is user experience. That's got no meaning in terms of what the user's seeing. If you run off to the CIO going, I've got 10% drop in the AF class on the core router in the MPLS, he's going to go like, what? Get out of here. Stop bothering me, right? You've got to say, my users in this location are experiencing degraded performance. Here's a chart of how much slower the applications are because this bandwidth is limited. Or
because they need more bandwidth. Yeah, that's the verbiage you got to put it in. They need more bandwidth.
And so this is the key with quality of experience. You might think in quality of service and packets and flows, but the reality is when you're talking to the business, you have to be thinking about quality of experience. The managing director is here, his app is running, this is what he's saying. If we made this change, it would improve that experience for that user. This is why I want to talk about quality of experience, not quality of service. And I think the argument here, and I would make the argument, quality of service leads you, focusing on it and playing with it leads you down a path of only one path, best path, destination-based routings, tags, best effort, highly complex, but doesn't actually deliver the business benefits that you want. For the amount of money, again, a generalization, for the amount of money you will spend putting together a QoS policy, you probably aren't going to deliver something back to the business that it actually wanted, which was click the button on the app and it works the same way every time.
One problem I have with this whole discussion of ours, we've couched it in terms of SD-WAN. So what we're implying here, and that I think is going to be a tough one for some folks to swallow, is that to leverage a UX benefit, what we've kind of made the point is you got to go invest in SD-WAN and buy SD-WAN. Do we actually believe that that's the case?
I think I do. So here's a question for you. Let me expand this a little bit. Are you worried about SD-WAN being proprietary? So all of these vendors have these proprietary technologies. Is that something that's going to stop you from buying them? Or would you rather have an open IP packet network using OSPF or BGP or MPLS?
It depends on the kind of a customer I am. If I'm an enterprise customer, I probably don't care. I'm going to invest in a solution that does it for me at whatever the price model is that I'm happy with. If I'm a service provider customer, I don't know. Maybe not. I know the MEF went to a great deal of trouble to standardize SD-WAN. They published Metro Ethernet Forum. They've published that. So somebody must have been asking for that. I don't think they made up a standard just because. But again, going back to enterprises, which are probably more of the folks that are listening to us yammer on and on, Greg, I think it ends up being an investment into a technology with a vendor that you trust and that has a proven track record. And there's a lot of years behind SD-WAN now and several very mature solutions that are out there from VMware, from Cisco, from Silver Peak, and I don't want to list them all because then someone's going to get offended and I'll forget somebody. But there's a long list of them that have a good track. The
point is that they're all doing something a little bit differently. They've all got
or a lot different.
No convergence on a single technology at this point in time. Some of them are good in some situations. Some of them are very good in others. Like some of them are early to SDN Federation. So we saw recently CloudGenix announced that they're integrating their SD-WAN with Checkpoint and Palo Alto and F5 via their cloud blades. We know that Talari Oracle SD-WAN is very good at this per packet, asymmetric flows, data, recovering data. There's so many different solutions here that I don't believe there'll be a convergence on a single standard. And I also think that because it's an overlay, there's nothing stopping you from having multiple overlays.
Well, I'll back up a sec. I think there will be a convergence on a common base set of functionality that may allow for some interoperability, but there's always going to be a lot of difference in the details and how these systems work. I don't think you'd be able to pick up a Cisco endpoint and hang it off of a VeloCloud, like a Viptela endpoint and hang it off of a VeloCloud controlled network. I doubt that.
That will never happen because the APIs that the vendors have inside of their edge devices will talk to their cloud. So if there's going to be interoperability, it'll happen at the cloud controller, the SDN controller to SDN controller. So your VeloCloud would talk to your Viptela. But my point would be is by the time you do that, why would you bother? They're edge technologies. You're going to have a couple in your colo or your data center and your branch is going to have them. Maybe your European operations runs brand A and your American operations run brand B. And that's okay,
And that's okay. Yeah, I agree with. We've been doing it for years with all kinds of stuff. We've always invested in our own particular. I like Palo Alto network firewalls. That's what I'm going to install. I like F5 load balancers. That's what I'm going to install. And you go to another place and they're running A10 load balancers.
Yeah, it's just load balancing at the end of the day. You learn whatever the local lingo is. It's like, this shop does Python, that one does Perl, this one runs JavaScript. It's all the same at the end of the day.
But, back to the original question, are we saying you've got to have SD-WAN to have the kind of quality of the user experience that we're describing? And for the wide area network, I don't have another solution here. Anything else goes back to what we were talking about in part one, and I think a little bit of part two. The difficulty of engineering with legacy tools, something that would deliver the same user experience, is so astronomically difficult, fraught with peril, and likely to fail as your network changes, even if you had that scheme right day one. It's a static configuration. You have to have something that can analyze the network in real time and react to it, and then have application context built around it to deliver that consistent user experience.
But the thing is, as you move to higher and higher bandwidths, the use of QoS is actually a negative in some cases. If you rate limit something.
Of course, we talk about increasing bandwidth because, of course, that's the obvious answer. It's just it's a budgetary constraint for folks, or it's an availability constraint for folks.
Yeah,
where they
and
they want.
And one of the other interesting things that's coming up about public WAN or internet-based networks is permissionless connectivity. I don't need AT&T's permission to connect to my Verizon-based site or my Comcast or my BT or my Virgin Media or my Telstra in Australia. I can just put everything onto the public WAN and connect it how I see fit. I don't need their permission. I don't need to talk to their sales reps. I just order an internet service. It gets provisioned as a consumer item or as a standard service, and away I go. I don't have to go.
As long as you've got a couple of choices, then in theory, most of the vast majority of the time, you should have a viable path for your traffic to take. If one's having a tough day, the other one should go. You've just got to have real and true diversity in those circuits. Something else we haven't really talked about.
Even if you've only got a single supplier and you go and get a consumer grade internet and a business grade internet connection and a 4G, 5G.
I wish you luck if you do that, but I get your point. But yeah.
Yeah, in some jurisdictions you can have 4G, 5G permanent circuits. So with 5G in particular, it's still a few years away, but within a 5-year strategy, they're talking about mobile broadband, fixed price, $50 a month type thing of broadband at home delivered over wireless 5G.
Okay.
There'll be caps and whatever, but we'll see how the market emerges. But that's what they're talking about with 5G. That because of the extra spectrums and frequencies at the top, there's going to be a bunch of restrictions. You're going to have to be within 500 meters of a 5G tower and so forth and so on. But mobile broadband is definitely an option, and it's not going to be hugely expensive over time, but in the time. So the biggest thing for SD-WAN, however, the thing that really gets me excited is use of controllers, analytics, and visibility tooling. So I can do asset management, configuration management, centralized configuration, log collection, status monitoring, and monitor the user's experience, that quality of experience of the user at the application. And
I'm trying to bring this to a wrap, but I got one more point to make. Now, you just listed off a whole
come on,
bunch
you
of
derail my wrap then. Come on, buddy.
There's a whole bunch of features you just listed off there. How do you know which SD-WAN vendor offers which features? Because not every SD-WAN vendor offers all of those features. Guess who just published a white paper? The Packet Pushers did. Jason Gintert, who was a friend of ours, wrote a SD-WAN white paper that's available on our subscriber site, ignition.packetpushers.net, that has a matrix listing a whole ton of features that the different SD vendors provide, and has a checkbox. Does this vendor carry this? Yes or no? So you can start to figure out what you want in the SD-WAN solution and whittle down your choice of vendors pretty quickly using the matrix.
There's so many vendors, and as I said, as we said, there's so many good ones, and there's a solution for everybody there. You don't get stuck on the big vendors or the main players, because their solutions are often not innovative. They're just big and fat because they're built for companies that maybe they're looking for features that are relevant to certain people and not others. I would strongly encourage you to look at new vendors that you would not normally consider, because often those SD-WAN products are significantly different and it may be relevant to your specific use case.
And in a few cases, good enough is good enough. Maybe you want a firewall that's got a few SD-WAN features, and that's good enough for what you're looking for. Those solutions are there. Maybe you need several hundred or even into the thousands number of sites. Well, there's only a few solutions that scale that large. That's another big question to ask.
Scaling and when you scale large, you might have to go for a dumber SD-WAN solution, because holding all that state in the network is not easy, having really, that sort of stuff. But don't get hooked up on compatibility and interoperability. I think that's something that you actually don't need. What you want is to get benefits into your WAN right now. And if you've got a compatibility issue in 3 to 5 years, that's fine, because we're used to handling those. We've been doing those for 20 years. You should be ready for it. Interoperability is a furphy right now. Different for the campus, different for the data center, but for SD-WAN, that's true.
Are we right? Are we wrong? Give us some feedback in the comments. We'd appreciate your thoughts here on SD-WAN, quality of service, quality of experience, and how to deliver a consistent experience for your users.